The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows, painting the polished wooden benches in a golden hue. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, mixed with the nervous energy of people waiting for the trial to begin. Lawyers shuffled papers, court clerks whispered quietly, and a few members of the public sat stiffly in the gallery, eyes fixed on the front of the room. The tension was almost tangible, like a heavy weight pressing on everyone's shoulders. The judge entered the courtroom, his robe flowing behind him as he walked with calm authority to the bench. He was a well-known figure in the city, respected for his fairness and dedication to justice. Everyone knew that when he presided over a case, it would be handled with care and integrity. Today, however, he felt an unexpected unease that he couldn't immediately place. He took his seat, arranged his papers, and looked out over the courtroom, scanning the faces of the people present. That's when he saw her. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Across the room, standing in the defendant's box, was a woman he recognized instantly. It had been years, too many years to count, since they had last seen each other. The sight of her stirred memories he had tucked away, buried beneath the responsibilities of life and the weight of his work. He could see the same spark in her eyes, the same quiet strength that had always been there during their childhood. She was no longer the girl he once knew, carefree and laughing as they played in the streets of their old neighborhood. Life had changed her. She had grown taller, her face more serious, and there was a weariness about her that made his chest tighten. He tried to focus, to maintain his professional composure, but the memories flooded in. He remembered the way they used to climb the trees in the park, racing each other to see who could reach the top first. He remembered the afternoons spent pretending they were explorers, finding hidden treasures in alleys and abandoned lots. He remembered the small victories they celebrated together, the games they played, and the promises they made to always have each other's backs. And now she was here in a courtroom, accused of a serious crime, and he had to preside over her trial. The courtroom clerk called the proceedings to order, and the judge straightened in his seat, his hands resting on the bench. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of his duty. Justice demanded fairness. Personal feelings had no place in the courtroom. Yet, every time he looked at her, he felt the pull of the past, the connection that had never truly faded no matter how many years had passed. He wondered what had happened in her life to bring her here, what struggles she had faced, and what led her down this path. The woman stood quietly as the charges were read aloud. She appeared calm on the surface, but the judge could see the tension in the way she gripped the edges of the defendant's box. Her hands were steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. He remembered the child she had been, brave, curious, and full of laughter, and he wished he could reach back in time and protect her from the hardships life had thrown her way. But he knew he couldn't. All he could do was ensure that the trial was fair and that every piece of evidence was carefully examined. As the lawyers presented their opening statements, the judge listened intently. The prosecution painted a grim picture, outlining the charges and describing events in a way that left little room for doubt. The defense lawyer, a young but determined attorney, countered with a calm, measured argument, hinting at inconsistencies and possible misunderstandings. The judge's eyes never left the woman in the box. He studied her closely, noting every subtle expression, every fleeting emotion. There was a strength in her that reminded him of their shared childhood, a resilience that had carried her through life's challenges. The gallery was filled with people who whispered among themselves, their curiosity about the case mingling with the tension in the room. Some of them had known the woman before. Others only knew her as the defendant. None of them realized the history that connected her to the man presiding over the trial. The judge's recognition was a secret, locked away behind his professional demeanor, but it weighed heavily on him. He felt a responsibility that went beyond the courtroom. He owed it to her and to the truth, to make sure that justice was served. During a brief recess, the judge stepped down from the bench and walked to the side of the courtroom. He needed a moment to collect his thoughts, to remind himself of the importance of separating personal feelings from professional duty. He looked at the woman again who was sitting quietly in the box and felt a pang of empathy. He remembered the long talks they had shared as children, the dreams they had whispered to each other, and the promises to never give up, no matter how hard life became. He wondered how many times she had had to fight just to survive, how many doors had closed in her face, and how many times she had felt forgotten. When the trial resumed, the judge's mind was sharper than ever. He listened carefully to each witness, each piece of evidence, and each argument presented. He asked questions that probed deeper, seeking clarity and truth. He noticed small details that others overlooked: a hesitation in a witness's voice, a contradiction in testimony, a pattern that didn't quite fit. All the while, he kept one eye on the woman in the box, assessing her reactions, trying to understand her story. He knew that the truth was rarely simple and that appearances could be deceiving. As the morning progressed, the judge began to see cracks in the case against her. Certain testimonies didn't align with the evidence. Some witnesses seemed unreliable, their statements inconsistent. The judge felt a growing sense of hope, tempered by caution. He could not let personal feelings influence his judgment, but he could ensure that every detail was examined, every claim scrutinized. He owed her that much, and he owed the law the integrity it demanded. The woman, sensing the judge's attention, felt a mixture of fear and comfort. She recognized him too, though she dared not hope for any special treatment. She had learned long ago that life often demanded strength in the face of injustice. She straightened in her seat, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Memories of their childhood flickered in her mind. The games, the laughter, the sense of being understood without words. She wondered if he remembered those times as vividly as she did, and if he did, would it matter now in a room filled with strangers and formalities as the weight of her future hung in the balance? By midday, the courtroom was tense with anticipation. The judge called for a brief pause to review some documents, and the murmurs of the audience filled the air. Lawyers hurried to examine files, assistants shuffled papers, and the defendant waited silently, her hands clasped in her lap. The judge, sitting alone for a moment, reflected on the strange twists of life that had brought them here. He thought about the paths they had taken, the obstacles they had faced, and the resilience that had defined their lives. He realized that their reunion in this place was more than coincidence. It was a reminder of how interconnected life could be, and how past and present often collide in unexpected ways. When the trial resumed, the judge approached his role with renewed focus. He was determined to see justice done, to separate fact from assumption, and to listen to the story that the evidence and witnesses were telling. Every glance at the woman reminded him of the human element in the law, the lives affected by decisions made in this room, the emotions, the hopes, the mistakes, and the possibilities for redemption. He knew that fairness required patience, diligence, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. As the first day of the trial came to a close, the courtroom emptied slowly. Lawyers gathered their papers, witnesses left one by one, and the public filed out, still murmuring about the case. The judge remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the day's events. He felt a mix of emotions: concern for the woman, curiosity about the truth, and a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the days ahead would be challenging, that the trial would test his judgment and resolve. But he also knew that he could not turn away, that he had to face the past, the present, and the truth all at once. As the judge finally left the courtroom, he looked back at the empty seats and the polished floor, imagining the conversations and memories that had filled the room over the years. He thought about the childhood friend who had unknowingly walked back into his life under the weight of accusation, and he felt a quiet determination. He would do everything in his power to ensure that the trial was fair, that every detail was considered, and that justice was served. But more than that, he hoped that this unexpected reunion might offer both of them a chance to reclaim some of what had been lost: trust, understanding, and perhaps even a renewed sense of hope. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars honked, people hurried to their destinations, and life went on. But in the quiet of the judge's mind, the memory of a childhood friendship lingered, a reminder of the bonds that withstand time, distance, and circumstance. And as he prepared for the days ahead, he knew that the journey of this trial would be about more than just the law. It would be about people, relationships, and the enduring power of recognizing the humanity in each other, even in the most unexpected moments.
The next morning, the courtroom was filled with the quiet hum of anticipation. The sun barely filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The judge arrived early, as he always did, his robe crisp and his expression serious. Yet, beneath the professionalism, there was a sense of unease, a mix of curiosity and concern that he could not shake. Today, the trial would continue, and with it, the questions about the woman before him, the one who had been his childhood friend, would grow louder, both in the courtroom and in his mind. As the session began, the judge glanced at her again. She seemed calm, almost composed, but there was a tension in her posture that betrayed her nerves. She had always been resilient, even as a child, but the trials of life had left marks on her. Her eyes, though steady, carried a depth of experience, a story of survival that the judge could sense even without knowing every detail. He wondered about the years between their childhood and this moment. What had happened to her? What choices had been forced upon her? And yet, even now, he could see the spark that had always defined her spirit. The lawyers presented their arguments, carefully weaving through the facts and testimonies. The prosecution laid out their case, emphasizing the evidence and painting a stark picture. The judge listened closely, weighing every word, every detail. He had learned over the years that truth was rarely as clear as it seemed, that appearances could be deceiving, and that people's lives often carried layers that were invisible at first glance. As he observed the proceedings, his thoughts kept drifting to the past, to the long afternoons he and the woman had spent together in their old neighborhood. They had shared laughter, small secrets, and dreams of a future they both hoped would be brighter than the streets they grew up on. The courtroom seemed almost suspended in time as memories returned. He recalled the way she had climbed the tallest trees with him, fearless and determined, laughing when they nearly fell but always proud of their victories. He remembered the evenings spent racing through alleys, imagining they were explorers discovering hidden treasures. Those moments had seemed ordinary at the time, but now they carried the weight of nostalgia, reminding him of a bond that had endured despite the years and the distance life had imposed. It was a connection that he could not ignore, no matter how hard he tried to separate it from his duties as a judge. Meanwhile, she sat quietly in the defendant's box, aware of his presence and the subtle recognition in his eyes. She had not expected to see anyone from her past in this place, let alone someone who had once been so close to her. Her mind wandered back to their childhood, to the small joys they had shared and the promises they had made to face the world together. Life had not been kind to her, but the memory of that friendship gave her a strange comfort, a reminder that she had once known trust and care. She wondered if he remembered those days as vividly as she did, and whether he understood the journey she had endured to get to this point. As witnesses were called, the judge paid close attention, his years of experience guiding his questions and observations. Some testimonies seemed credible at first, but he noticed inconsistencies and hesitations that others might have overlooked. He asked careful, probing questions, seeking clarity and understanding. He could sense the tension in the room, the weight of every word spoken, and the impact each statement could have on the woman's future. Yet, through it all, he remained focused, determined to ensure that justice was served fairly and accurately. During a break in the proceedings, the judge stepped to the side of the courtroom and allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. He thought about the paths their lives had taken, the opportunities he had been given, the challenges she had faced, and the resilience that had carried her through hardships. He realized that life was rarely fair, that circumstances could shape people in ways beyond their control, and that judging someone required more than just examining facts. It required empathy, understanding, and the ability to see beyond the surface. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just as a judge, but as someone who had once known her as a child and had witnessed the person she had always been. As the trial resumed, the woman listened carefully, responding to questions with poise and honesty. She knew the importance of each answer, the weight it carried in determining the outcome of the case. She had learned to navigate difficult situations, to hold her ground, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. She drew strength from the memories of her childhood friendship, from the sense of being seen and understood by someone who had once known her completely. Even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, she found a small measure of courage, a reminder that she was more than the accusations against her. The judge continued to observe, noting the subtle reactions of everyone in the courtroom. He saw the anxiety of the witnesses, the determination of the lawyers, and the quiet hope in the woman's eyes. He considered each piece of evidence, weighing it carefully against the testimonies and the context of the situation. His mind moved methodically, analyzing every detail, searching for the truth that lay beneath the surface. Yet, even as he focused on the legal aspects of the case, he could not ignore the human story unfolding before him, the story of a life shaped by struggle, resilience, and the enduring power of connection. As the hours passed, the courtroom became a place of reflection and quiet tension. The judge called for additional documents, asked for clarifications, and took time to review every detail meticulously. He understood that the outcome of this trial could change the course of the woman's life, and he was determined to approach it with care and fairness. The bond they had once shared, the memories of their childhood, added an extra layer of responsibility. He wanted to honor the truth, to ensure that justice was not only done, but seen to be done, and that no one's life was altered by misunderstanding or haste. The woman, aware of the judge's scrutiny, felt a mixture of anxiety and reassurance. She sensed that he was not just looking at the case, but at her as a person, trying to understand the circumstances that had brought her here. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the doors that had closed, the obstacles she had overcome, and the moments of despair that had tested her spirit. She realized that she could not change the past, but she could present the truth of her story and hope that it would be heard. The memory of their childhood friendship gave her a quiet strength, a reminder that someone in this room remembered who she truly was. By late afternoon, the judge had begun to see patterns in the evidence that others had missed. Certain statements did not align, some witnesses appeared unreliable, and small details suggested that the situation was more complex than it had initially seemed. He took careful notes, planning the questions he would ask to clarify the truth. He knew that the trial was far from over, that the days ahead would require patience and diligence. Yet he felt a growing sense of determination, a belief that fairness and justice could prevail if he remained attentive and committed to his role. As the session came to a close for the day, the courtroom emptied slowly. Lawyers gathered their papers, clerks moved quickly to organize files, and the woman left the box with quiet dignity. The judge lingered for a moment, reflecting on the day's proceedings. He thought about the twists of life that had brought them together in this setting, the paths they had taken, and the resilience that had defined their journey. He understood that the trial was more than a legal matter. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance to see truth and fairness prevail, and a reminder of the enduring bonds that connect people across time and circumstance. Outside the courtroom, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet drama that had unfolded within its walls. People hurried past, absorbed in their own lives, while the judge and the woman carried the weight of the day's events in their thoughts. The memories of childhood, the lessons learned, and the struggles faced lingered in their minds, shaping their understanding of the present moment. They had been brought together again by circumstances neither could have anticipated, and both sensed that the days ahead would test not only the law, but the strength of character and the depth of understanding between them. As he prepared to leave, the judge felt a renewed sense of purpose. He would approach the trial with fairness, diligence, and empathy. He would ensure that every detail was considered, that every testimony was examined carefully, and that justice was served. Yet he also knew that the human story at the center of this case, the story of a childhood friendship, resilience, and the enduring power of memory, was just as important as the facts themselves. It was a reminder that behind every trial, every accusation, and every piece of evidence, there were lives, emotions, and connections that could not be ignored. The woman, walking quietly through the halls, felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew that the trial would continue, the challenges lay ahead, but she also felt a sense of hope. The presence of someone who had once known her completely, who remembered her as she had been before life's hardships, gave her a quiet strength. She would face the days ahead with determination, guided by the truth of her story and the memory of a friendship that had endured despite time and circumstance. The first full day of the trial ended, leaving both the judge and the HOA.
The third day of the trial began with the same quiet tension that had filled the courtroom from the very start. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, but it did little to warm the air. The room was heavy with anticipation. Everyone seemed to sense that today would be important. The judge entered first, moving with calm authority, his robe flowing behind him. He took his seat, adjusted his papers, and looked out at the people gathered. But his eyes were drawn, as always, to her. The woman standing in the defendant's box seemed smaller than the day before, though her posture remained strong. There was a mix of determination and fear in her eyes, a reflection of the battles she had faced in life and the uncertainty of what was to come. The judge began the day with procedural matters, listening to lawyers calling witnesses, and reviewing documents, but his mind kept drifting to her. He remembered how she had once been fearless, climbing trees higher than any other child in their neighborhood, laughing as they dared each other to reach the top. He recalled the long evenings when they would sit quietly, sharing their dreams and fears, promising each other that they would never let life break them. That memory now felt both sweet and painful, knowing how much she had suffered since those days. The first witness of the day was a neighbor who claimed to have seen the woman near the scene of the crime. The prosecution led her carefully, asking pointed questions to create a clear story. She answered, her voice confident but slightly shaky. The judge listened closely, noticing small pauses, subtle contradictions, and details that didn't add up. His years on the bench had taught him to look for these moments, the tiny cracks in stories that might reveal the truth. He asked a few questions himself, gently but firmly, clarifying points that seemed inconsistent. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably, aware that the proceedings were taking on a sharper focus. As the testimony continued, the judge's thoughts wandered again to their shared childhood. He remembered the way she used to cheer him on when he struggled, the way she always seemed to understand him without words. He realized how rare it was to have a friendship like that, and how cruel it felt that life had forced them into this situation. Yet he knew he could not let memories cloud his judgment. He had a duty to remain fair, to examine the facts carefully, and to make decisions based on evidence, not feelings. The woman in the defendant's box shifted slightly, aware that the judge was watching her. She had sensed his presence from the start, the subtle glances that reminded her of who he was. She felt a mix of fear and hope. She feared that their past connection might be used against her, that she might seem to be asking for special treatment, but she also felt a strange reassurance, knowing that someone who had once truly known her was now looking closely at the proceedings, noticing the small details, and perhaps understanding that she was more than what the charges suggested. A second witness was called. This time a store employee who claimed to have seen her on the day of the incident. The prosecution presented a photo, asking the witness to identify the woman. The witness hesitated, unsure, and the judge immediately took note. He asked the witness a few simple questions carefully to clarify the timeline and the accuracy of the observation. The witness' story began to show gaps, small inconsistencies that could change the perception of the case. The judge felt a growing sense of hope, though he remained cautious. He knew that the trial was far from over, and that more challenges awaited. As the morning progressed, the courtroom became more tense. Every person seemed aware that the trial was revealing more than just the immediate events. It was uncovering the deeper layers of life, the struggles people faced, and the resilience required to survive. The judge felt the weight of responsibility heavily on his shoulders. He remembered how the woman had once faced hardships as a child, growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were limited and challenges were many. He thought about how life had shaped her, and how the courtroom now held the power to change her future once again. During a brief break, the judge stepped aside and reviewed the case files in detail. He compared witness statements, looked for patterns, and tried to piece together the truth. Every now and then, his mind wandered to their shared past, the games, the laughter, the quiet moments when they had confided in each other. Those memories gave him a human perspective that no case file could provide. He understood that justice was not just about law and procedure. It was about people, lives, and the truths hidden behind appearances. The woman, sitting quietly during the break, reflected on her own journey. She thought about the mistakes she had made, the circumstances that had led her here, and the small moments of hope that had kept her moving forward. Seeing the judge recognize her, even subtly, reminded her of who she had been and who she could still become. She resolved to remain strong, to answer questions honestly, and to let the truth come forward. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it with honesty and persistence. When the trial resumed, a new witness entered, someone who had a closer connection to the events. This witness's testimony began to complicate the prosecution's story. The judge noticed every nuance, the way the witness hesitated, the small contradictions, and the moments of uncertainty. He asked questions that required careful thought, probing for clarity without seeming biased. Each answer revealed more complexity than the prosecution had presented, and the courtroom began to sense that the case was not as simple as it had seemed. The woman remained composed, responding to questions with careful honesty. She knew that every word mattered, that her demeanor and her story could influence the judge and the jury. She remembered the lessons from her childhood, the strength, the resilience, and the determination to survive. She drew on those memories, letting them guide her through this moment. Though fear lingered, it was tempered by a quiet resolve, a belief that truth had a way of revealing itself even in the darkest moments. The judge continued to ask probing questions, following the threads of the evidence and testimony wherever they led. He noticed the small details that others missed, the hesitation in a witness voice, the slight contradictions in statements, the moments that suggested there was more to the story than initially presented. He felt a growing conviction that the woman's situation was more complicated than the prosecution had claimed. Yet he also knew he could not jump to conclusions. Justice required patience, diligence, and a careful examination of every fact. By mid-afternoon, the tension in the courtroom had grown. The public, the lawyers, and the defendant all seemed aware that the day was revealing important truths. The judge felt the weight of every decision he had to make. He thought about the woman's childhood, the obstacles she had overcome, and the resilience she had shown. He knew that life had dealt her harsh blows, and he wanted to ensure that the courtroom did not add unfairly to them. He resolved to approach every question, every witness, and every piece of evidence with clarity, fairness, and empathy. A turning point came when a witness admitted uncertainty about a key part of the prosecution's story. The courtroom went quiet, everyone sensing the significance of the statement. The judge leaned forward, asking additional questions to clarify the situation. The details that emerged suggested that the woman might not have been fully responsible for the events she was accused of. The judge felt a cautious optimism. The truth was starting to come forward, but he knew the days ahead would still be challenging. The woman felt a flicker of hope. She could see that the judge was attentive, that he was considering every detail carefully, and that the inconsistencies in the testimony were being noticed. She drew on her inner strength, remembering the child she had once been, the one who had faced the world with courage and determination. She realized that the trial was not just about proving innocence or guilt, but about being heard, about showing the truth of her story. As the day drew to a close, the judge reflected on the progress made. The trial had revealed complexity, uncertainty, and resilience. He had witnessed the courage of the woman before him, the determination of her defense, and the gaps in the prosecution's case. He knew that more work lay ahead, that the days to come would require focus, patience, and careful judgment. Yet he also felt a growing sense of purpose. This trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a chance to see fairness prevail, to uncover truth, and to honor the human stories at its heart. The courtroom emptied slowly. Lawyers gathered their papers, witnesses left quietly, and the woman stepped out of the defendant's box with calm dignity. The judge remained for a moment, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the past, the shared memories of childhood, and the unexpected ways life had brought them together again. He knew that the next days of the trial would be critical, but he also understood that the human element, the courage, resilience, and strength of character, was as important as the evidence itself. Outside the courthouse, the city continued its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded inside. The judge walked through the halls, considering the next steps, the questions to ask, and the details to examine. He felt the weight of responsibility, not only for the law but for the life of someone he had once known so well. The woman, meanwhile, reflected on the fourth day of the trial began with a sense of anticipation that hung over the courtroom like a quiet storm. The judge entered as usual, his robe moving smoothly behind him, and took his seat at the bench. The courtroom was full, more crowded than before, with people curious about the developments in the case. There was a quiet energy, a sense that today could change everything. The woman in the defendant's box sat straight, her hands folded calmly, though her eyes betrayed the nervousness she felt deep inside. She had faced tough situations before, but this day felt different. It carried the weight of revelation, and she could sense that the truth was close to surfacing. The first part of the morning was taken up by reviewing evidence. The judge carefully examined documents, photographs, and messages that had been submitted as proof. He asked questions that were precise but fair, making sure that every detail was understood. He noticed small inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, little gaps that did not fit together logically. The more he looked, the more it became clear that the story being told by the witnesses might not be the full truth. The judge leaned forward, listening intently as lawyers explained the connections and contradictions. He felt a quiet determination growing inside him. He wanted to make sure that nothing was overlooked and that justice would be fair, regardless of the pressure or attention in the room. As a new witness was called, a person who had been close to the events in question, the tension in the courtroom grew. The witness appeared nervous, shifting uncomfortably in their seat. The prosecution guided them through their statements, asking for details about times, places, and actions. But the witness hesitated, paused, and sometimes contradicted themselves. The judge listened carefully, asking gentle, clarifying questions. He wanted to make sure the record was accurate and that every angle was explored. With each answer, he could see the cracks in the prosecution's narrative becoming more visible. The courtroom remained silent, everyone sensing that the story was changing, that the layers of truth were starting to appear. Throughout the morning, the judge's mind often wandered to the woman in the defendant's box. He remembered her as a child, brave and lively, with a quiet confidence that had always set her apart. He thought about how life had shaped her since those days, the challenges she had faced, the obstacles she had overcome, and the resilience she had shown. He wondered about the circumstances that had brought her here, about the unfairness that life sometimes brings, and about the responsibility he now carried. He could not let her past influence his decisions, but he also could not ignore the human story behind the charges. Justice required both fairness and understanding, and he intended to give both. The woman noticed the judge's steady gaze. She felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. The fear came from the seriousness of the trial, from the possibility of an outcome that could change her life forever. But the hope came from seeing someone she had trusted as a child paying attention, noticing her and taking the time to understand. Even in silence, she could feel a connection, a sense that the truth had a chance to be recognized. She straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for the questions and scrutiny that would come with the witness testimonies and evidence. As the day progressed, more witnesses were called. Each one added pieces to the puzzle, and the judge carefully pieced them together. Some statements supported the woman's account, suggesting that she had been misunderstood or wrongly accused. Others contradicted earlier testimonies, revealing confusion, error, or misperception. The judge remained calm but alert, questioning inconsistencies and ensuring that the truth had a chance to emerge. He could sense that the courtroom, once filled with tension and certainty, was now beginning to feel the uncertainty that comes when evidence starts to challenge assumptions. Midday brought a significant moment. A key witness for the prosecution was hesitant, unsure about what they had actually seen. Their hesitation opened a door for the defense to present new arguments and evidence. The judge allowed careful questioning, letting both sides explore the details thoroughly. As the witness spoke, it became clear that their memory might not be reliable, that the facts were more complicated than initially presented. The judge felt a growing conviction that the woman before him might be innocent, that the truth was beginning to surface despite the pressure and confusion of the trial. Yet he knew that caution was still required, that assumptions could not replace evidence, and that fairness demanded patience and diligence. The defense lawyer stood calm and methodical, presenting additional evidence and testimony that further supported the woman's account. Photographs, documents, and statements that had been overlooked earlier were brought to the judge's attention. He examined each item carefully, asking questions to clarify dates, times, and sequences of events. Each clarification helped him build a clearer picture of what had really happened. He could feel the tension in the courtroom shift slightly, as if the very air had changed with the emergence of new possibilities. The woman in the box allowed herself a quiet breath, knowing that truth was finally being heard. The judge also noticed subtle signs of integrity and honesty in her demeanor. Her calm, steady answers, the honesty in her voice, and the careful way she acknowledged questions without over-explaining revealed a character that had survived hardships and maintained strength. He remembered the child she had been, the one who had faced life with courage, and he realized that many of the same qualities were still there, even now. This recognition strengthened his resolve to examine the case carefully, to ensure that justice was served and that the human story behind the charges was respected. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that the trial had reached a critical point. The evidence and testimonies were starting to align in a way that supported the woman's innocence. The judge carefully reviewed the documents, cross-referenced the timelines, and asked pointed questions that revealed gaps in the prosecution's arguments. He sensed that the courtroom, once confident in its assumptions, was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. There was a quiet shift in energy, a feeling that the truth was emerging slowly but steadily. The woman remained composed, knowing that patience and honesty would guide the day to its proper conclusion. A particularly important moment came when a witness admitted that they had misremembered events and that their initial statement might have been inaccurate. The courtroom reacted quietly, but the significance of this admission was profound. The judge asked further questions, clarifying the details, and carefully documented the inconsistencies. He felt a mixture of relief and determination. Relief because the truth was becoming clearer, and determination because he knew the work was not yet finished. Every detail still mattered, every question still required attention, and every decision needed to be fair and just. The woman felt a small surge of hope. She realized that honesty and persistence were slowly revealing the truth. She had feared that the trial would judge her past mistakes rather than the events in question, but now she saw that the facts were being examined carefully. She felt a quiet sense of validation, a feeling that someone was finally seeing her for who she truly was. Memories of her childhood friendship with the judge returned, comforting her and giving her strength. She knew that no matter the challenges ahead, the truth was beginning to shine through. As the afternoon wore on, the judge carefully guided the proceedings, ensuring that each piece of evidence was examined and that all testimonies were cross-checked for accuracy. He remained impartial but attentive, fully aware of the human impact of his decisions. He thought about the struggles the woman had endured, the resilience she had shown, and the importance of fairness in every ruling. He understood that justice was not only about proving guilt or innocence, but about honoring the truth, protecting the innocent, and ensuring that every person was treated with dignity. By the end of the day, the courtroom was quieter than it had been in the morning. Lawyers packed their papers, witnesses left one by one, and the woman stepped down from the box with a quiet dignity. The judge remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the developments. The trial was not over, but today had revealed important truths. He felt a growing confidence that the case was moving toward fairness, that the evidence was beginning to tell a clearer story, and that the human character of the woman was being recognized. Outside the courthouse, life went on as usual. People hurried along the sidewalks, cars honked, and the city moved forward. Yet inside, the events of the day had shifted something profound. The judge and the woman carried with them the sense that truth had begun to emerge, that justice was possible, and that life had a way of correcting itself when careful attention and honesty were applied. Both knew that the next days would be crucial, that challenges remained, but they also understood that courage, patience, and persistence had started to change the direction of the trial. The woman, walking quietly through the halls, felt a mixture of relief and determination. She thought about her past, the hardships she had faced, and the strength she had drawn from those experiences. She realized that her honesty and resilience were now being recognized, not just by the court, but by someone who had once known her calm. The fifth day of the trial began with a quiet tension that felt heavier than the days before. Sunlight filtered through the courtroom windows, but it did little to lighten the air. Everyone knew this would be a decisive day. The judge entered as usual, his robe moving with calm authority, and took his seat at the bench. He looked at the woman in the defendant's box, and for a brief moment the years fell away. He remembered the child she had once been, the one full of curiosity, laughter, and courage. Now she sat before him, grown and faced with a situation that could change her life forever. He felt a quiet responsibility, knowing that his decisions today would carry weight far beyond the courtroom. The morning began with the defense presenting a final witness. This person had critical information that could confirm the woman's innocence. As the witness spoke, carefully and honestly, the courtroom listened in silence. The judge leaned forward, absorbing every word, noting the details that connected the story together. The witness explained what had really happened, filling in gaps that had caused confusion in the earlier days of the trial. There were moments of hesitation, but the honesty in the witness's voice was clear. Each revelation brought a sense of clarity, helping the judge piece together the truth that had been obscured by misunderstanding and incomplete accounts. The woman in the defendant's box watched the proceedings carefully. She knew the significance of every word, every explanation. Her heart beat faster with each new detail that emerged in her favor. She had hoped for this clarity, for someone to tell the truth as it had really happened, and now it was unfolding before her eyes. She felt a mixture of relief, fear, and cautious optimism. She could not let herself relax completely, not yet, but she allowed herself a quiet hope that justice would finally be recognized. The judge listened to the prosecution respond to the new evidence. They tried to challenge the witness, to question their memory, and to argue that the case was still strong. But the judge, with years of experience, saw through the attempts to twist the story. He asked careful, precise questions that exposed contradictions and gaps in their arguments. Every answer the witness gave strengthened the truth. Slowly, it became clear that the woman's version of events, supported by evidence, was consistent and reliable. The prosecution's narrative, once so certain, now appeared flawed and incomplete. As the trial progressed, the judge noticed the subtle changes in the courtroom. The tension that had filled the room for days began to shift. People leaned forward in their seats, watching closely as the truth emerged. The audience, the lawyers, and even the witnesses seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. The woman remained composed, her calm demeanor reflecting her inner strength. She had faced challenges before, but nothing like this. She drew on her memories of the childhood friendship with the judge, remembering the trust and understanding they had shared, and it gave her courage to stay steady and honest in the courtroom. The turning point came when a key piece of evidence was presented. It was a document that had been overlooked before, one that clearly supported her account. The judge examined it carefully, reading every word and asking questions to confirm its authenticity and relevance. As the details became clear, the courtroom began to understand the situation in a new way. The evidence showed that she had been wrongly accused, that the events had been misinterpreted, and that her actions had been lawful and justified. A quiet murmur spread through the room as people realized the significance of what had been revealed. The woman felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she remained composed. She knew that nothing was certain until the judge gave his ruling. She thought about the struggles that had brought her here, the mistakes she had made, the hardships she had endured, and the perseverance that had kept her going. She also thought about the bond she had once shared with the judge, the trust and understanding that had formed in their childhood. That memory gave her strength, a reminder that someone truly saw her for who she was, even amidst the chaos of the trial. The judge, reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, felt a profound sense of clarity. He could see the truth unfolding piece by piece. The woman before him was not guilty of the charges that had been brought against her. Life had been difficult for her, and circumstances had led to misunderstandings. But the facts now clearly showed that she had acted with honesty and integrity. The judge's mind balanced the weight of the law with the human story behind it. Justice, he realized, was not only about rules and procedures. It was about understanding lives, seeing the truth and giving people a fair chance. When it was time to give his ruling, the courtroom was silent. The judge's voice was calm, steady, and firm. He explained the reasoning behind his decision, detailing how the evidence, the witness testimonies, and the inconsistencies in the prosecution's case led him to conclude that the woman was innocent. He spoke of the importance of fairness, the value of truth, and the responsibility of the court to ensure that justice was served. Each word carried weight, and every person in the room could feel the impact of his decision. The woman listened carefully, her heart pounding. As the judge announced that she was cleared of all charges, a wave of relief and emotion washed over her. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the possibility of a life-altering outcome, and now the truth had finally been recognized. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sense of vindication and hope. She had been heard, her story had been understood, and justice had been served. The courtroom, once filled with tension and anticipation, erupted in quiet murmurs of amazement and relief. As the trial concluded, the woman stepped down from the defendant's box. She moved slowly, taking in the moment, feeling the weight of the past days lift from her shoulders. The judge remained at the bench, watching her with a mixture of professional pride and personal recognition. When their eyes met, there was a quiet understanding, a connection that went beyond the courtroom. They shared a brief unspoken acknowledgement of their history, their friendship, and the journey that had brought them back together in this unexpected way. It was a moment of human connection that carried as much significance as the legal verdict itself. Outside the courtroom, the air felt lighter. The woman took a deep breath, feeling freedom in a way she had not felt for a long time. She reflected on the challenges she had faced, the obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, and the courage that had carried her through. She also thought about the judge, who had approached the trial with fairness, care, and empathy, and how rare it was to find someone who could balance authority with understanding. She felt gratitude, not only for the verdict but for the recognition that her true character had finally been seen. The judge walked through the empty courthouse halls after the trial, reflecting on the events of the past days. He thought about the woman's journey, the evidence, the testimonies, and the strength of character she had shown. He realized that this trial had been more than a legal proceeding. It had been a story of resilience, trust, and the enduring bonds of human connection. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served, that truth had been recognized, and that he had fulfilled his responsibility with fairness and care. In the days that followed, the woman began to rebuild her life. She felt a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. Inspired by the experience and the fairness that had been shown to her, she sought out opportunities to move forward, determined to use her second chance wisely. The memory of her childhood friendship with the judge stayed with her, a reminder that human connection, honesty, and resilience could overcome even the hardest trials. She realized that the past could not be changed, but the future was hers to shape. The judge, meanwhile, returned to his work with a renewed sense of clarity. He understood that his role was not just to enforce the law, but to see the people behind the cases, to recognize the human stories, and to ensure that justice was fair and thoughtful. This trial had reminded him of the importance of empathy, patience, and diligence, and he carried those lessons with him in every case he handled. He felt a quiet pride in knowing that his actions had helped restore not just the woman's freedom, but her dignity and hope. The woman and the judge met briefly one last time after the trial. There was no need for words. Their eyes spoke volumes. They remembered the childhood moments they had shared, the laughter, the trust, the small victories, and acknowledged the journey that had brought them back together. It was a silent celebration of resilience, friendship, and the power of truth. They parted with a sense of understanding and respect, both carrying forward the knowledge that life could bring unexpected reunions, challenges, and chances for redemption. As time passed, the story of the trial became known in the community, not just for the unusual coincidence of the judge recognizing his childhood friend, but for the way fairness, honesty, and perseverance had prevailed. People spoke about the courage of the woman, the diligence of the judge, and the lessons that could be learned from both. The story became a reminder that even when life seems unfair, when circumstances feel impossible, the truth has a way of emerging, and justice can be found when care, integrity, and understanding guide the process. The woman moved forward with a